God cares about human beings. He cares about marriage. He has laid forth his model to say, guys, this is for your flourishing. Mm-hmm. It can be an absolutely beautiful, wonderful thing. And I really do believe this. Most people are looking for that.
Hey friends, Mark Yarbrough here. I am joined by Josh Winn and Rebecca Carroll. We are the Story of Scripture team at Dallas Theological Seminary. Welcome to What Does the Bible Say podcast. In this podcast, we dive into the deep topics of life, really and truly about anything that the Bible addresses. So make sure that you like and subscribe, ring that notification bell so you don't miss any episodes of What Does the Bible Say. Let's get started.
I remember the first thought I had after my dad, who married us, said, I now present Mr. and Mrs. Winn. I remember the first thought was, I am so glad I am done with that. And I was thinking of like dating.
Yeah, right.
The games, the
sure.
the stress, the tension. And now having kids in that phase right now, it's still there.
Before we talk about what the Bible has to say about it, why don't we talk about the way the world views it so that we can kind of juxtapose it? Because
Sure.
I remember a moment driving down just I-35 through the Dallas-Fort Worth area and looking up and seeing a huge billboard for an adult store and praying that my kids just wouldn't happen to look up at that moment so I didn't have to explain it. And I think what's happened in today's culture is that we've turned dating into a sport. We've turned sex into an accomplishment, and the more notches you have on your belt, it's almost the better. And the tragedy of that is that we've taken something that is so beautiful and so sacred and turned it into this twisted thing where instead of, the world tells you this is your highest, this is, sexual satisfaction is what you're aiming for, and that's your highest. It's actually diminished it. And instead of giving people a high view of intimacy, it's shredded it so that intimacy almost isn't a factor. And that's so opposite of the way the Lord intended it.
Yeah, I think on a topic like this, right, we need to acknowledge at the very beginning that there is a pattern of the world and then there's God's pattern. I mean, so right, when we're always asking the question, what does the Bible say about that? That's what we're doing because God does speak on this. Okay, I'm going to play off of what you just said there. This is a verse that I go to all the time. But in Romans 12, okay, so you immediately know where I'm going to go here. And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind he will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him. Here's the part that I want to zero in on right now. Don't copy the behavior and the customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Okay, so if we're just looking at it, that part right there, I think we need to acknowledge, and it doesn't take any time to convince me, you guys, us, anybody, I think, listening, there's a pattern of the world. And that's what I'm hearing you say, right? There's a pattern of the world. And so one of the things that we just obviously want to move into is how does that differ from what God says versus this pattern of the world? Now, that also doesn't mean that there are always bad things in the pattern of the world. Doesn't mean it's all evil.
Right.
I think there are some good things. Man, I watch movies at times and I go, man, that's a great point. That seems to resonate with this greater issue that God is talking about. But I know we'll have to get into the specifics as well.
What I love about that verse is I think it helps for this conversation set the discussion of sex, dating, marriage, all that into this larger context of how we present ourselves to God, that we belong to God. And I think that's actually one of the pushbacks against this message that we're hearing everywhere around us that you brought up, Rebecca, and that is that almost the sum total of life, this is the message that we hear, almost the sum total of life is self-gratification through this, right? And yet Romans 12, it surfaces this idea that there's a larger issue at stake. It's to whom we belong, and really that passage applies to sex. It could apply to eating. It could apply
Work.
to any number of things.
It's a framework, right?
That's right,
Yeah.
because it's this orientation to God, and I think that might be one of the first important dimensions is that in a biblical view, sex, marriage, and dating is not the fundamental aim of a person's life. That is not the goal of a person's life, and it's not even a way that we would go after human flourishing. Now, I think we can have flourishing marriages and relationships for sure, but if we say, boy, that's what life is all about, the Bible says differently. It's about something more than that, and I think that makes a big difference on how we even navigate this topic.
I think it's worth talking about some of the mixed messaging that has been present. For instance, we're in a cultural moment where there is a large pushback movement against purity culture. And all cards on the table, I didn't grow up in it. I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in a non-evangelical climate. And so I kind of came to an understanding about this later after I was already married with a couple kids. But to a lot of the women I talk to in counsel, they get to marriage and they feel like they did everything right, and then they're disappointed because they had this messaging: if you wait, everything will be perfect, everything will be easy, it's going to be even better than you thought. And then the opposite side of that coin is that young girls grew up under this, and this may never have been explicitly said, but they grew up under this impression that, hey, the onus of your brother's purity is all on you. And so you have to watch what you wear, you have to watch what you say, you have to watch what you watch. You can't listen to that kind of music, you can't hang with those kind of people, because if you cause a brother to stumble, that's on you. And so we've got these two camps of mixed messages. One is sex is everything and go for as much as you can. One is bad and dirty until you're married. And I don't think the Bible lands in either one of those camps.
Yeah. No, I'm with you on that. It's interesting because I did kind of grow up in that moment of, purity rings and hearing all of that. It's interesting that I hear, and you're right, there's a lot of discussion about this right now. And from that generation that went through that. And it's interesting. I'm just saying this from a male that was in that. I never saw it one-sided. I never heard that. I'm not saying it wasn't. In certain presentations or things like that. That it seems to me it is a both and here in this entire discussion, because we can't run from the call of purity. Mm-hmm. We also can't run from the call of this is not for men, for women, it's for both, because that goes back to the bigger topic, Josh, that I think you were talking about, right? It's that, hey, look, God has something to say about this framework to begin with, and at the same time, praise God that we live in that God is a God of forgiveness, and people are coming to faith at all sorts of stages and phases of life. And so I want to unpack this a little bit, because I'm with you there. I'm hearing a lot of discussion about it. And maybe when we step into some of the specifics, we're going to hit that. But I see it as a both and, because there is this call to, God does choose to present some level of standards for us.
Right.
And I do appreciate those that are challenging generations to say, hey, let's set up healthy patterns that please God. And at the same time, to say this is not just an issue that is after one gender. This is what God is wanting his child, male and female, right? Here's God's approach, and his way is always right and always best. But it also doesn't mean it's going to be easy, nor is it going to be perfect.
Right.
See, that's the other issue.
Right.
And part of that, you build these expectations of what this is going to be like.
Well, and I think that's maybe the other, if there is another criticism or a criticism of that purity culture, it's the maybe the implicit idea that you don't talk about sex. If you're a Christian, you don't talk about sex.
Right.
It's bad. And then I think you said it's bad, and then once you're married, it's good. And it's fascinating because when I was in college and my wife and I, we had pre-marriage counseling, and it was helpful to talk about sex in that context and to articulate expectations and things like that, because again, the Christian, whether they were involved in this version of purity culture, it was like, we just don't talk about it. Right. What should you expect on your wedding night?
Right.
And it's that type of thing where I actually think, I'm not going to give credit to kind of that view of the world, but there is a seedling in there where they say, hey, there is something good and appealing about it that we're like, yeah, God created it.
Right.
And God created sexual relationships. We're sexual beings, but there are contexts and again frameworks and structures that really allow us to flourish in. But we shouldn't run from that. And so again, I'm glad we're having this conversation, because I'd love to disabuse all of us of that of any holdings we have onto that we shouldn't be able to have a conversation honestly about it.
Yeah. Well, we're also in an interesting cultural moment where there's this really big pushback against authority, against rules, against regulations. Right. And when my kids were little, I kind of quickly understood that if I was going to put a no on something, I had to be able to articulate why. And I think it's helpful when we think about the parameters that God has put around love and dating and sex and marriage. I think particularly around sex, I think it's helpful to think about God's heart behind that boundary. If God is a loving Father, if God is our creator, if God knows better than we do how we are, what makes us tick and how we will best flourish, and God put a boundary around that, then there has to be a good reason why. We also know that, from Psalm 16, the boundary lines have fallen for us in pleasant places. So Mark, why don't you kind of talk to us about why that boundary is in place? Why is it actually better for someone to say no to sex until it's in the proper parameters that got established?
Okay. Then let's just start with this. The overall teaching of Scripture is that sex is to be expressed in marriage between a man and a woman that have made that lifelong commitment to each other, to culture, and most importantly to God. So let's just start with that's the given. And I think that we could talk about the argument from beginning to end that's going to go all the way back, I would argue, to creation itself. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the natural place to begin is in the beginning. And it starts there in Genesis chapter 1, right? I'm flipping over to Genesis 1:26. And it says, then God said, let us make human beings in our image, to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all of the wild animals on the earth, the small animals that scurry along the ground. So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it, reign over, right? So in other words, he's created man and woman and gives them this instruction. There's only two at the very beginning, right? Adam and Eve. And it's like, hey, you guys are a team, you're a unit, procreate, fill the earth and subdue it. Okay, by the time you get into chapter 2 at the end, I actually love this phrase. So at the end of after Eve is created, right? So notice the language here. Eve is created, man and woman are together, they're in the garden, and it says this, at last, the man exclaimed. I love the way this version phrases it. At last, the man exclaimed, this one is bone from my bone and flesh from my flesh. She will be called woman because she was taken from man. This explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united as one. Now the man and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. Okay, so that's just this little bitty statement. It doesn't use the word marriage. I acknowledge that. We all know that. But what it does do, it tells us that the concept of marriage is a man and a woman together under God's blessing, committed, in living it out with a purpose that's ordained by God. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's at the biggest, highest framework of what marriage is.
And that ties into, again, that where we talked about just a second ago, that larger framework is that the purpose of this relationship is found in Genesis 1. It goes all the way back to why God created humanity. That's to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and to bear his image, right? To represent him around the world. And that can be done if you're married, it can be done if you're single. But interestingly enough, the the aspect of sex in that it is integral to the union, but it is not the end or the telos of the union, right? It's not the goal and purpose of the union. And I think, again, that's I think one of the biggest pushbacks of what we hear today is that our relationships, and specifically our marriage relationships, are meant to be God-directed, right? They're meant to be God-focused. It's for the benefit of God. It does benefit us, and it's good, but it's not about us.
So back on your question, when you were asking that, okay, so what then does God say? What does the Bible say about this flourishing? Where does it lead us at the large scale to where then we start talking about specific things? It's a concept of what marriage is, and it's a positive thing. It's for the flourishing of human beings that God has created, a man and a woman. So this is a good thing. Now, see, here's what I would argue. To some degree, there is a little bit of that message out there in the world.
Oh, yeah.
You see really good movies sometimes, and you're like, there's always romance in the presentation and the storyline and the plot, and we all connect with that because I do think for those that are called to marriage, that's a whole nother discussion, those that are not. But those that are called to marriage, I appreciate you saying that, Josh. I'm with you there, that it doesn't have to do with the purpose of a human being. But for those that are called to marriage, it's a good thing.
Right.
And I think we need to applaud that. But we have to, as Christians, right, applaud God's way. Right. That's what we're after. That's what we're chasing.
I think just of the words, now the man and his wife were both naked, but they felt no shame. And I think of, my two teenagers and their friends and the ethos of the climate right now. And I think, okay, you're having sex so that you can have intimacy with someone. You're having sex so that you can have a relationship with someone. It's just completely flipped itself on its head. But if you look at this, they were both naked and they felt no shame. Okay, when are you the absolute most vulnerable ever?
When you're in the hospital and you're wearing one of those gowns and, it's like...
because you're naked underneath it.
That's my point.
Because you're naked underneath it.
That's right.
So they were as vulnerable as they possibly could be. You can't get more vulnerable than when you're naked, but they felt no shame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so if you want... in order to get what you're looking for, which is that ultimate intimacy with another person, you won't have that outside of a committed, covenantal relationship where you can be 100% vulnerable and know that that person isn't going to leave. That's what I say to the person who's like, why do I need a piece of paper? Why do I, why do I need that covenant? Why do I need that commitment? Because what you're really craving is actually on the other side of that, because what your heart, what your soul longs for is to be fully vulnerable with someone, to be deeply known and yet fully loved. And this casual sex hookup culture simply cannot give you that. It cannot.
What that gives is it gives a thrill for a moment.
A minute,
that
maybe.
Then brings tragedy of shame. That's exactly what
it's
does.
It's a cycle of shame and despair. And I just want to shake our friend that's listening and just say, this is true.
Yeah.
This is true. Your heart's telling you this is true.
Yeah. No, I'm with you there. Okay, so I want to come back to your question, okay, because that's a great question. So we're moving down the path of going, okay, so this is God's model is for our flourishing, right? I mean, and I know that we're all on the same page of going, we really do believe that God's way is always right. It's always best. And so there's a message from the world out here that says, hookup culture, have sex whenever you want. And we're saying, and it's not us, we're just saying what we believe Scripture is teaching here of going, no, there's a path here that God says that's going to lead to shame. It just does. I mean, down the road, may not do it instantly, but down the road, it brings consequences because we are not made for that.
Right.
That's the reality. And there's tons of, honestly, psychological things that happen through the sexual union.
Physiological things.
Oh my goodness.
Right.
And think of what that can do in terms of expectations. And I mean, because now you bring in that crash of the world into this, and God's going, hey, I'm wanting to protect you from all of that. You want to be in a position of flourishing. I love that word in this, because I've never met any couple that was getting married. It's fascinating. Okay, Christian or not, it's like, what are you looking for in marriage, right? Mm-hmm. And you start hearing that language of intimacy, a lifelong partner. I mean, nobody goes into this and saying, I just want somebody that's temporary for about 6 weeks, and then it's going to be a disaster, and we're going to have a couple of kids, and we're going to have lawsuits, and we're going to have, I mean, it's like nobody ever says that. Does that make sense? Nobody ever goes into that going, I'm looking for pain in a relationship. Right. I mean, it doesn't work. I'm trying to overstate a problem here, because I know when I have married, hundreds of people, I hear the same stories. People are looking for love. The problem is when you, to state that old country and western song, looking for love in all the wrong places. I mean, that's true, because that's what the message of the world, it just brings. And so
what would you say to the person that says, well, because a lot of our conversation, even over the last couple of minutes, is we've used words like casual sex and things like that.
Right.
What do we say to the person that has been with a partner, not married, but been with faithfully with a partner for 10 years, and they're saying that who you're describing is not me. I'm kind of finding that, and one of the things I find in not being married is a benefit to being able to leave if something goes south, right? Because we all know that sometimes you don't. you date someone or get in a relationship, that's not the right person. Maybe something happens and what have you. Is that a caveat to this, or do we, are we going to say, hey, that flourishing is still, or we're still going to feel the effects of that relationship if we're in it for 10 years and then we leave? Do you see what I'm saying? It's the difference of saying I'm moving from partner to partner versus I'm in a stable relationship. It's not marriage. And I still think there's a benefit in being able to leave.
One of the things that I love about my marriage that makes it so safe for me is that Mike and I have gone through some things that, we could have quit, and we didn't. And it's better and stronger. And because there was that covenant in place that we had made in front of each other, in front of witnesses, in front of God, we knew that no matter what happened, and it was nothing like big or, I don't want to give the wrong impression, but just seasons where things got really, really hard and you weren't feeling the lovey-dovey feelings at the moment. Because we persevered through that, because of our commitment to the marriage and our faith in the Lord, we are stronger, we are better. I feel safer with him than with anyone else. I am confident that if a big mountain were to appear in front of us, we'd be able to climb it because we've done it before. And so I think you will never have the security and the ability to be your most vulnerable self if you know that the other person has a get out of the relationship free card. You just can't.
So it's the idea that it's the commitment that you're making before you hit the difficult times, before you hit those moments that allows you to navigate it, as opposed to maybe the person that says, well, here's the benefit of having the escape plan or the option to escape. What you're saying, Rebecca, it sounds like, is if you have that in place,
you'll take it eventually.
You'll take it.
Right.
I mean, that's the danger, right? Yeah, I agree. I think that's I'm a big believer that if you're going to form a belief, if you can form the belief before you're in the midst of a situation where it's going to pull and tug at you,
right,
to form the belief in that moment, if you don't have it in place, it's really hard to navigate it, right? Because our emotions can be swayed easily and they're very powerful. And so this idea of commitment on the front end before you hit those waters, it kind of removes that. Ariel and I have had, we just had a verbal policy, even before we were married, we're just like, divorce is not an option for us.
Right.
And that has helped us weather some pretty significant storms because we have committed that we're going to work through it. We're going to sit down and work through it. And that doesn't mean there aren't arguments and challenges that that are persistent, that we go through as a family, and it affects our marriage, right? But it's saying, no, that's not an option. We've made a commitment back there, and it goes to the vows that we have said, and it's said in so many marriages, and when you think about it, you're like, wow, that's a pretty significant commitment. So.
Okay, so then let's move the discussion on. Let's move it. If God has a framework, and it is for a man and a woman committed to each other, to him, it's public for all to see, that it's an acknowledgement that his way is best, it's right, and it's for our flourishing, okay? That sex is something that is designed for that entity, not outside. So now we're seeing the polarities here, right? Because we know what the message of the world is. Let's talk about dating. Okay, let's transition to that because that's an interesting word even in our culture today. So if somebody is asking that question of going, okay, so then if I'm saying this is God's model out here, now how do I get into that? And I'm just shooting straight with you guys. We've been married 33 years. Jennifer and I have been married 33 years, and so I'm not dating right now. I mean, I do date my wife, but I'm not in that game, but I do talk with my kids about it, and I hear different language. There's some things that are the same. I use old people language sometimes, and I just acknowledge that,
Do you tell them to court? Are they courting?
No, I don't use that word.
Thank you for not using that word.
Oh, I do not use that at all. I'm old, but I'm not that old, Rebecca.
Do you use courting? I feel like you do. Okay.
No.
Okay. There it was.
Whoa.
What? Take
That. Listen, it's not an insult.
Oh, okay. She goes, I hope you don't use courting, but I think Josh uses courting. It's not an insult though, Josh.
No, it's just
whatever the words are. Isn't it interesting how those words that are trying to describe a concept are always there? Every generation has them, because really what we're talking about, if someone is wanting and desiring to marry, it implies that you have to meet somebody. And what are you looking for? How do you get to know them? So the words may change, but the concept doesn't.
And what's tricky is that concept didn't exist in the Old and New Testament. I mean, there was no, hey, can I take you out on a date? Because marriages were 99.9% of the time, if not 100% of the time, arranged by the parents.
And some still are. Many still are today in other parts of the world.
Yes.
However, I will give one little caveat there, but yet there are parameters that we see. And
that's where I'm going.
Yeah. There are parameters that we see, especially further that this gospel goes and it moves out of Jewish culture. It never fully leaves Jewish culture, but as it moves out of that into the rest of the world, there are a bunch of verses that talk about, hey, here are principles that are at stake in all of this.
Right. You have to use wisdom to discern what they are.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, to your question about dating or this topic, again, I think this is where we see polarities. If the world says the end goal is sexual gratification, then dating is designed to it's a volume sport. Right, you're trying to get to that objective in the largest number possible. The biblical design of a marriage relationship, though, like something we haven't mentioned but has been fundamentally implicit, is this concept of love between a husband and a wife, where in the act of commitment, we've talked all around it, is we are giving ourselves over. Person is giving themselves over to another and forsaking all others. And so as it comes to dating, if that's the objective, to identify the person that we believe that God has for me, and it's how do I go through this process of getting to know people such that I'm able to say that that's the person that I'm going to choose to love, to give myself over to and forsake all others. And what for me at least, and again, as I'm with you, Mark, I mean, I don't remember dating too much. And when I do, I crawl in the fetal position because it's just a horrible, it's a difficult time. Sure. But when I'm talking with my boys, in particular, about dating, I'm like, we want to leave that person better off than we received them. So if you find out along the way that that's not the person for me, doesn't mean that they're bad. It's like interests or all these things that we always factor into relationships. That's not the person for me. That's okay. But we treat them with respect and leave them off better than when we receive them. And in my mind, that fits wholly with how this design of preparing the way for the person we're supposed to marry. Because if you think about it this way, if we treat all of our dating partners horribly, what makes us even think that once we find the one we're supposed to marry, that's the person we're going to treat with respect, with sacrificial love? That is a skill and it's a discipline that I think has to be cultivated, such that when it's time to make that ultimate commitment, it's not our first time trying to do that and making these big leaps. So I think it's all connected.
Can I jump in, because there's a precursor to what you're talking about, and that, like, when we're thinking about these categories, that if we're chasing after God's way, the way for flourishing, the way for what He has laid forth of saying this is best. I love some of the language that is used in 2 Corinthians. So sometimes we've all heard that language of unequally yoked. I mean, that sounds, I can remember when the first time I ever heard that, I was like, the only yolk I thought of was like an egg, and I was like, seriously, I was like, what in the world is this talking about? But I love the way, so listen to this. This is a large scale concept, but listen to what the Apostle Paul says to the church of Corinth in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14. He says this: don't team up with those who are unbelievers. How can righteousness be a partner with wickedness? How can light live with darkness? What harmony can there be between Christ and the devil? Now look, he is purposefully using this language of polarity to make a point. So for a Christian, someone that has said, I want to follow God's way, I have trusted in God's way of salvation because of Jesus. So if that person is a believer, one of the first things I take them to is this verse here, because this is like the highest level, if I can phrase it that way, of going, so if someone is dating, and they're a believer, how important is that they date other believers? There we go. How about that for a loaded?
It's the foundation.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely the foundation. It's if our relationship, our orientation to God is, I mean, it is the ultimate defining element of our own identities. So I think the wisdom of Paul there is just an acknowledgement that says, if your identity is grounded in Jesus Christ, there is ultimately no deep intimacy you can have with someone who is not.
That's right. Yeah, and I mean, come on, let's play this one out a little bit, because what about those that date, if I can phrase it this way, as missionaries? It's like they want to. I mean, I've heard this one before.
Sure.
I have counseled with so many people that are out there, and I mean, it is, I'm not saying amazing things can't happen and that God's not at work, because God's always at work, even in bad situations.
Sure.
But what would you say, Rebecca, to somebody that's out there and saying, I am a committed believer, I'm a Christian, and but yet I've met this great girl, or I've met this great guy, they're not, but I like all these things about them. They have a great job. Their yes is yes. They're committed. I mean, all these other positive things that we'd want to see. What would you say to that person?
You're going to find yourself in a whole mess later on, because the likelihood of someone pulling you away from a deeply devoted life is higher than you pulling someone into the way of a deeply devoted wife. And then what are you going to do when you're, if I'm talking to a woman, what are you going to do when your husband digs in his heels, won't go to church, and says you can't go either?
Yeah.
So what are you going to do if he adamantly refuses to raise your kids knowing the way of Christ? What are you going to do? You can't, that's not grounds for divorce.
Yeah. This is a for those that haven't married discussion, right?
Right. For those
because
who have not yet
there's
married.
a whole other discussion that I think we need to have.
Different
but for those
discussion.
that haven't, and they're out there saying, yes, I'm gonna push all my chips under the table here. I wanna flourish in the way that God has designed it, right? And that's what I'm looking for. To that person, we are saying, if you are dating, you need to date someone that has that same core conviction as a Christ follower, right? I mean, that's what we're saying, because it can, if you don't, and you marry then, it can lead to all sorts of challenges. I cannot tell you the stories, of individuals that happened to, and then they knew it going in. They said it, I'm going to be able to lead them to the Lord, and that never happened. And the conflict that came out of that, of raising children, the values, all of a sudden, lifelong, there was this battle, and they're in it now.
Right.
Yeah, that's a big challenge. So I like bringing that one up just because it's so foundational, right? Now then it starts leading then to, it does beg the question, what about somebody that comes to faith and they are in a relationship, they're married, and one of them comes to faith. What about that person?
They stay with them.
You stay with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you ask God to make your life a testimony to them of the importance and the value of following after Jesus and believing Jesus. And that does and has happened. Praise God for that.
Oh, yes.
I think that speaks to the fact that that believing person in a marriage stays with their unbelieving spouse. That actually says a lot about marriage, right? That the commitment that they've made is even that powerful, despite what we even just said about how important it is for two believers to be married. And it's just an amazing confirmation about the commitment and the importance of that commitment that a person makes to their spouse.
Yeah.
I would say to that person, if you are the one who's come to faith and you're you're married to an unbeliever, you would do well to have someone more mature in the faith walking with you, a spiritual director or one of the pastors in your church or a women's minister walking with you, because what's probably not going to work is you coming at them with great force. And so the Lord can use anything, but I would say there are ways that are more effective than others. And so you're going to want someone who is been a Christian longer than you have to kind of disciple you through that process, because that is tricky. It's probably going to be a long road. It will require great patience, great faith and trust in the Lord, a lot of prayer, and you want someone speaking into that.
Yeah, amen for that. Now, can we go back to like your topic, because you were in it and that was great. So if an individual at that highest level is like, I'm a believer, I know that I am under the guidance of God, the parameters set forth by God, that yes, sex is for marriage. I want to go into it God's way. I know I need to marry a believer. Now then, this is where it gets tricky. What about all the other things that are so important? I mean, because you used some great words a minute ago. I think you were kind of saying things like likes and dislikes and how we're all wired and uniquely created by God. And, call it what it is. There's like morning people and there's night people. I mean, all these real practical things, right? About how we as unique human beings. So what about that? I mean,
finding somebody
that, I mean, because that's a real issue. Now, to me, that's fascinating, by the way, thinking of like all the dating apps and things like that, because there is a level of appropriate science, that sounds funny, of using that word. But bottom line, that's just asking about questions of compatibility. Because back in the day, right, when I was dating, that's what dating was, right? You were kind of you're finding out about compatibility and likes and dislikes and things like that.
I get this question a lot. Is it okay for a Christian to use a dating app?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So here's what I would say to that. that question. Can you be faithful using a dating app?
Right.
Can you stay,
That's right.
can you be a godly person while
Right.
you use a dating app? Then yeah, I don't see why not. Now, if that's going to mess with you somehow, if you can't be faithful using a dating app, if you find that
Right.
trips you up somehow, then that's off limits for
Right.
you.
Right.
And you're just going to be better off asking people to introduce you to someone, letting people know that you'd like to date, joining activities where, singles gather and meeting someone that way.
I wholeheartedly agree. Yeah,
right.
I'm with you. Yeah.
I think that you can look at all of the things that encompass dating and say, I don't know if I want to put a rule or a boundary around that. I think the better question is, can I be faithful to the Lord? Can I walk in a godly way in that activity? And if the answer is yes, then I think it's probably okay for you.
Yeah.
But if the answer is no, then
I'm with you. It's a great, if that can be a good tool
Right.
to simply meet people.
Sure.
But let's move down there. What are you looking for in a person? So if you're dating,
yeah.
God's way for flourishing, we're going
Right.
down a trail here. What does the Bible say? Does it give us any parameters?
Yeah.
And then what about things that the Bible doesn't say? It only speaks wisdom and
Right.
high scale principles to. That's what I'm going to argue, right? It
Right.
doesn't give us all the specifics, does it?
I told both of my kids that chemistry and fireworks and butterflies wears off after a time. You want someone, if you're going to spend the rest of your life with someone, you want to be in love with them, certainly, but you also really, really want to like them. And you want to be able to feel at home with them. You want to be able to feel safe with them. This has to be someone you can be your most authentic, vulnerable self with.
Yes.
And so if there's anything about that person where you always feel like you have to have your best face on or be on your A game, I would question why.
I'm going to go down the path things like character.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the Bible speaks to things such as a person's, this is not men or women, it's all of us, of character. What do you see in their character? That's a big one, about their integrity, their language, how they do life under and with the Lord. I used to tell, I've said this to my kids, look, my very first, as a human being that has been saved by grace through faith, based on what God's done through the Lord Jesus, is that my very first commitment is to the Lord, right? I mean, my framework of life is what God has done. My next commitment that I have is to Jennifer. And that's why this one is so big, right? I mean, it is huge because to me, that's number 2. I always joke with my kids. I'm like, hey man, I got 4 of you and the best you can do is be number 3. I mean, you can be 3, 4, 5, and 6, and you guys can pivot and jockey for power who's going to be number 3, right? I mean, I say that jokingly, but you guys know what I mean. I'm like, but that's been a big thing for my kids to hear me say that. Mm-hmm. So it's why early on, and especially in some of those challenging teen years, I'm like, I can remember that with my kids, and I'd talk to them. I'm saying, don't cross the line with your mother. I will protect her. I mean, I can remember looking in particular in those interesting moments, and I'm saying, if you want to see an animal arrive, my job for that woman, we're in this together. And I'm saying, we will win the game. I don't mean that power threat. I mean, but it meant something. Now I'm hearing it on my older kids going, Dad, we get it. And the 2 that are married, they're understanding that. And I didn't realize, I can't say and I had it all mapped out, guys, but I am saying that I realized some things that I saw and it meant something to my kids. Now that they're seeing it, now the 2 that are married, they're going, I get it. And so the character, and now let's just talk about some practical things. I mean, like when you talk about likes and dislikes, I like your language of somebody that you're going to spend forever with, that you're going to, it's a lifelong commitment. How do you determine that kind of stuff? I mean, how did you guys in your relationships with Mike and with Ariella, and I can say the same thing with Jennifer, of like, because there's just some realities of just getting along, and is somebody a big talker, they're a verbal processor, and how is this true that sometimes opposites attract?
In the process of dating, I started to realize, there were certain qualities that know that I really valued and needed in a partner, because I didn't find it in others. And it was actually when I met Ariella that I was like, oh, that's actually the type of person or that character quality you were talking about. That's I need that as a counterbalance, or as a tutor, or you know what I mean, as or to help.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what I kind of meant earlier of this idea of like dating is this, you are trying to figure out ultimately. I mean, this is what I've taught my kids of. There are going to be some things that, since none of us is perfect, none of our spouses are perfect, and there are going to be plenty of things where we say, I'm going to overlook that, forgive that, and I'm going to do it because I've committed to this person and love them. But before marriage, you're in that position to say,
deal breaker.
I don't have to do that.
Right.
I mean,
That's right.
Exactly. That's a deal breaker for me. And it doesn't have to be a issue of sin or anything like that. It's just like, hey, look, that's not the type of person I want to spend my life with.
Right.
But when you get married, there's no going back. And so that's where it's like, and as I've talked with my kids, I'm like, you got to ask that question to say, is this something that, if there's this issue that comes up, or is this something where you're like, man, I can love them. I will love them despite that. Or is that a deal breaker? And
that's a good phrase.
And I have a hard time, I don't think there's a set rule on what falls into that category. Right. But I also believe that ultimately there is an ease that should come with it, if that makes sense. It's not like, man, I'm going to grit my teeth and love that person. It's like, no, I'm loving that person, and it is a joy to even endure that, because I know my wife endures a lot, and she does it with amazing joy because she's chosen to love me. And so I don't think it's hard and fast for everyone what those issues are. I think it's more of an approach.
I agree.
I can think of some red flags though.
Okay, let's hear them.
One of the things I love about Mike, and I think he taught me how to do this, is he never fights to win. He fights to resolve. Huge difference.
Oh, yeah.
He is always, when we disagree about something, Mike is not trying to prove that he's right. Mike is trying to work toward a resolution.
Sure.
That's great.
And he fights fair.
That's great.
He's really good about not bringing things up from the past, and he doesn't take a swing to hurt. And so fighting fair, I think, is tremendously important.
Yeah. That's good.
Can someone receive gentle criticism?
Yeah.
That's really important. Can you receive gentle criticism? Can they criticize you in a way that you can receive? These are really important things. Can they receive the truth from you? Can you receive the truth from them? Are they honest? Do you see them faithful in other areas of their life? Because if they're telling you they're going to be faithful to you, but then here, and here, they're not faithful.
That's
they're
right.
showing you who they are. And so a phrase I say a lot with my kids is, it's worth it to go at least a year around, it's worth it to take one spin around the calendar with someone, because you're probably going to see them in happiness, sadness, grief. You're going to see them in different stages. And I think that's important. And when someone shows you who they are, believe them.
Man, that's good, Rebecca. You know what I want to say to all that? I want to say, good job, Mike. Way to go, Mike. I want to say, good job, Ariella. Good job, Jennifer.
He's so the better half.
No, I understand that.
Truth.
Hey, something that happened in our family. So we have 4 kids, right? And you guys know them. And 2 of them are married. And it's been some amazing things because our kids are all really tight in age-wise. And so, in other words, there was like a season in our lives, right, when we had like 4 kids, 5 and under. And in God's kindness, I mean, somehow he protects you as married couple. At least he did us, because there's like a whole bunch of years that I don't remember. That's what I'm trying to say. And, and I think it's actually God's kindness, because, you have all those goals in life of like, diapers and then car seats and then.
That's why we have more than one kid, is we don't remember.
No kidding. Okay, so when our kids started dating, and that's a whole topic in and of itself of when to date. And by that, it can mean everything from just to be in environments, right, where you can meet people. It doesn't mean like, so dating, right, as I'm listening to my kids today, means like it's a commitment. We're chasing after this. We just use dating back in the day when you use that phrase of is like, hey, it's okay. I can just go on a date, like one singular, to start a process to learn. And okay, so whatever wording is used there, when you're in an environment, and there comes some time when you're going to commit and say, we're not committing to marriage, we're committing to I like that, go around the calendar with them for a whole year. We're going to give this a shot. Exclusive. We want to learn. We want to see things about one another. Our kids did something that they did it on their own. We didn't do it. So I've been real blessed to spend a lot of time with my mom and dad, to go to their house. And so if we are in town, every Sunday we go over to their house for dinner. Okay, it's just a given. And our kids have grown up in that environment. They're spoiled and they don't even know it. And but there's something that they started using this phrase, okay? And they said, so there is a test that's important to them. Do they fit at the Sunday dinner discussion? That's what they call it. Meaning, so at some point when they invite someone that they are dating in an exclusive, whatever that language that is used, so for them it'd be that they are dating, right? That's the word. And they want to bring them over to Papa and Mama Jan's on Sunday and sit around the table, and do they fit? Now, they don't mean that in a bad sense, like they're in some high superior position. Does that make sense? It is simply asking that question, like Josh, what you're talking about. Do you get along? Do they enjoy? Because there is a culture for every family and for every unit. And this is true of subcultures, right? I mean, it's just like, so at the Yarbrough household, on Sunday afternoons in the fall, we're yelling at Jerry Jones and the Cowboys. I mean, and it's like, well, if they despise that and think that's from the devil, then they might not be a good fit, know? So it's those kinds of just real practical things. And I can remember Jennifer and I that, right? I mean, that's a challenge of learning one another's families. That's where time is such a big, helpful thing. Because I told my kids, I said, when you marry, you will marry their family.
Yes.
And that's a good thing. And it means who they are and their experiences become your experiences. That's what a true unity of faith is. So I love what you guys are saying, and I appreciate that, about how you get to know people, right? How you get to figure out what makes them tick, and you can see facets of their life, that character issue. And I love that, Rebecca, you're like going, man, if they're like cheating at their place of employment, and they're talking about how deceptive they were on their taxes, and these practical things of life. Guess what, friends? That's gonna probably show up in all other areas of their life. So this value of dating is critical of getting to know one another.
It seems like a principle that surfaces that we all agree with, and that is, don't do it alone. Don't date alone.
Right.
What I mean by that is, if you're a parent, help your kids. Like, help them navigate this. Talk to them. I mean, it's not like I have it figured out. But no doubt, all of us made mistakes along the way, and it sure would benefit our kids to know about those mistakes to the degree that's helpful. And if you don't have parents in your life, or that's not a helpful thing, if you're dating, rely on your good friends to say, hey, I need them to be like Papa and Mama Jan, where you have outside more, I don't want to say objective, but you have a bit more people that have some wisdom, and they're able to look at it from a different perspective and say, yeah, this person's right for it. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. And it can save you from a lot of heartache, especially when you do it with people who trust you and you trust them, and they love you and you love them.
This is really weird. Okay, I'm going to go back to that dinner table. Okay, my kids. So our other kids have voted. How's that for weird? That gets on the edge of a weird thing.
I don't think that would fly in my house. But.
It just worked for our kids. They were kind of like going. So one day, one of my sons, I have two boys, I won't mention which one, brought a young lady over. Okay, and it was the Sunday dinner table, right? And we're having a discussion, and she just didn't fit. I'm just going to phrase it that way. Nice young lady. This is not a judgment. This is not a spirituality. It was just, it became very noticeable, right? And the other three kind of gathered around him and were like
right then?
no,
Oh.
no, yeah, that would be awkward, wouldn't it? It's like we're going to leave the room. We're going to leave the room. We're going to have a discussion. No, afterwards. Yes, exactly. And they were like, that, she doesn't fit. Why did you, and he said, how could you not see that? And why did you bring her over? And I mean, he was just like, she's hot. and right there on the spot, the other three were like, well, that ought to tell you something right there, because if that's your benchmark,
Right.
It was an amazing moment, though. Does that make sense?
Age. It wears off.
He owned it.
Sure,
right. It's the same thing that you
sure.
said. He owned it. And the other three were just like going, man, if that's your litmus test, you're in big trouble.
I think he needs to listen to our discussion today.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to send this. We're going to send this to him. And
that's good. That is huge. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I heard that and I was like, okay, leave that from our kids and my particular family and stuff like that. And I'm going, but that's true right there. What's your litmus test? What's your benchmark? What are you shooting for? And ultimately in this entire discussion, I mean, it started with God cares about human beings. He cares about marriage. He has laid forth his model to say, guys, this is for your flourishing. Mm-hmm. It can be an absolutely beautiful, wonderful thing. And I really do believe this. Most people are looking for that. That's what they want. Mm-hmm. It's what they long for. They're wanting to fill this natural longing, right. I would argue, in their heart.
It's why love songs are the most popular songs.
Yes.
It's why rom-coms are the most popular movies. It's because everybody wants that happy ending.
Right.
That's exactly right. And so when I think about this whole thing of the big picture, right, of love and dating and sex, I mean, right, we started there at the beginning, not of a desire to talk about God says, put your purity ring on, right? To go back to that topic, right? It's not an issue of obey these rules, right. Or it's not even an issue, do these things and it's going to be fireworks for the rest of your life. That's not what Scripture ever says. There is a long-term protective hedge that God has put forth, and it will produce flourishing, not just for, how about this? Not just for the husband and wife in this, but for the kids that if God blesses that way, the family unit, I'm going to take it one step further. Think of how this, in that original call to be fruitful and multiply. Friends, you take that out and it's like, this is the way God wants to design a world that produces not just strong marriages, but strong homes, that produces strong cultures where there's a family unit. That's going to lead to caring for one another. I could argue that that's going to lead to loving your neighbor as yourself. All of these things are, again, God's way is always right. It is always best. And it is for our flourishing. And I think maybe that's a good way for us to land this plane and just say, because God cares for us and He wants our best so that we can even produce the best for others.